The day my heart almost stopped for good, I also learned how little my daughter valued me. Standing in the kitchen, prescription in hand, I watched as Vanessa nonchalantly examined her perfectly manicured nails and informed me that $220 for my heart medication was too much to afford this month. Less than 20 minutes earlier, I'd transferred $4,800 to Westlake Academy for the twins' tuition. Money she had no idea I had. Money she wasn't supposed to know I had. Before we dive back in, let us know where you're tuning in from. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow, I've got something even more special lined up just for you. For years, I had been the silent anchor in Vanessa and Brandon's world, quietly supporting their family. As the grandmother to their twins Parker and Penelope, I had grown used to stepping in when they needed help. I cooked, cleaned, drove the kids to school, attended their events, and most importantly, financially supported their lives. All of it was given without hesitation because I loved them. But with each passing year, something inside me began to feel off. I had allowed myself to become so wrapped up in their needs that I lost sight of my own. It was only when my health began to deteriorate that the weight of my sacrifices became undeniable. I had been diagnosed with a heart condition, a problem that wasn't minor and couldn't be ignored. Still, I continued to prioritize their lives over my own. After all, what was family for, if not to sacrifice everything for? That was the narrative I had lived by for so long. It wasn't until I went to the bank one morning that the harsh reality of my situation hit me like a ton of bricks. My savings, which I'd worked so hard to build, were being drained. Not for my future, but to fund the lives of Vanessa and Brandon's children. Tuition payments to Westlake Academy for the twins, which I had agreed to cover for years, were draining my retirement account. The truth was, they didn't need my help as much as they had led me to believe. And I couldn't ignore it any longer. I stood in that bank, staring at my account, trying to absorb the information in front of me. What had I been doing? How had I gotten here? I had always believed I was doing the right thing, but now, it felt like I had been taken advantage of. My heart began to race, not from just the shock of seeing my savings depleting, but from the realization that I had been complicit in my own financial exploitation. I had allowed Vanessa and Brandon to control my life in ways that were unhealthy. They had painted a picture of dependency, a narrative that made me feel essential, but the truth was much darker. That afternoon, I walked into their home, my heart pounding, knowing the confrontation was inevitable. Brandon and Vanessa were sitting at the dining table, looking surprised to see me earlier than expected. The tension in the air was thick. Something wasn't right. They had been talking about something. A conversation that abruptly stopped when I walked in. I tried to brush it off, but my intuition told me this wasn't going to be a simple visit. Vanessa's smile was too bright, too forced. It felt like I was walking into a trap. "Mom, you're back early," she said, trying to sound casual but failing. "Yeah," I replied, setting my purse down. I didn't expect a family meeting today. I looked at Robert and Carol Reynolds, Brandon's parents, who were sitting at the table with them. Something was off. I felt like I had walked into a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. Before I could speak, Robert Reynolds extended his hand with practiced politeness. "Eleanor, so good to see you," he said, his expression stiff. "We were just discussing the twins' education," Brandon quickly interjected. "Nothing for you to worry about." His words were smooth, but his eyes told a different story. "Actually," I said, feeling the calm resolve inside me firm up, "I think I need to know what's going on." I turned to Vanessa, my gaze unrelenting. "What exactly were you and your parents talking about?" Her face stiffened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. "Nothing, Mom. Just a regular visit." But I wasn't buying it. "Don't lie to me. What were you discussing with them?" I asked again, my voice steady. Vanessa hesitated before answering, finally dropping the pretenses. "We were talking about the twins' tuition," she said, her voice bitter now. "Since you've apparently decided to abandon your commitment to their education, we needed to explore other options." The sting of her words hit harder than I wanted to admit. I didn't abandon anything, I said through gritted teeth. I made it clear that I can no longer prioritize their private school fees over my own health and security. That's a boundary, not abandonment. She sighed, clearly irritated. Semantics, Ellie. She leaned back in her chair. We don't have $4,800 lying around for the next payment. I blinked, absorbing her words. They had been leaning on me, expecting me to foot the bill for everything without question. Your husband's parents seem financially comfortable, I observed. Have they been contributing to the twins' tuition all along? A flash of guilt, or maybe annoyance, flickered in her eyes. They help when they can, she muttered, but they have 3 other grandchildren to consider, and Robert's semi-retired. I could feel my anger rising, but I fought to stay calm. So you've been relying on me, and yet you never mentioned that Robert and Carol were helping. How convenient, I said, the words laced with more hurt than I intended. Before she could respond, Brandon entered, smiling as though nothing had happened. Well, that's all sorted out, he said, his tone trying to mask the tension. Dad understands the situation. We're fine. I stared at him, unflinching. What situation would that be? I asked sharply. He paused, his smile faltering. Just family matters, Ellie. Nothing for you to worry about. I was done with their games. Actually, I'd like to discuss something with both of you, now that we're all here, I said, my voice cool. I've made an offer on a cottage near Lake Merrill. If everything goes well, I'll be moving within the month. Vanessa's head snapped up from her laptop, her eyes wide with disbelief. You what? She asked, the words coming out before she could stop them. Without discussing it with us first? I wasn't aware I needed your permission to buy my own home, I replied calmly, but my anger was barely contained. I'm 68 years old, Vanessa. I think I'm capable of making housing decisions independently. Brandon stepped closer, lowering his voice as if he were speaking to a child. Ellie, be reasonable. You don't have the financial resources for a property purchase. Not if you want any kind of retirement security. The condescension in his voice made my blood boil. Interesting that you're suddenly concerned about my financial security, I shot back, considering you opted me out of extended health benefits during my retirement processing. Brandon froze, his face shifting from concern to something darker. I have no idea what you're talking about, he said, trying to play innocent. I helped you with that paperwork as a favor. I shook my head, refusing to let him off the hook. The hospital billing department is investigating. If they find evidence of deliberate misrepresentation, they'll take appropriate action. Brandon's expression darkened, his tone lowering to a threatening edge. Are you threatening me? No, I replied, my voice ice cold. I'm stating facts. Just like it's a fact that I'm moving out and I'll no longer be paying the twins' tuition. The tension between us was palpable. I wasn't backing down, no matter how much they tried to manipulate me. I could feel the years of sacrifice weighing on me, but the anger I felt for being used, no, for allowing myself to be used, was stronger. The road ahead would be difficult. I knew I had to set boundaries with Vanessa and Brandon, but I also knew that this was the right decision for me. It wasn't just about a new house. It was about reclaiming my independence, my health, and my dignity. And this was just the beginning. The days following my conversation with Vanessa and Brandon were filled with a mix of emotions: anger, frustration, and an unexpected sense of relief. I had made my decision, and now there was no turning back. I was going to move out, set boundaries, and prioritize my own well-being, even if that meant walking away from the family dynamics that had once been so familiar. I spent the next couple of days tying up loose ends. The bank paperwork was finalized, and my offer on the cottage near Lake Merrill was accepted. It was an old, charming property, nothing fancy, but it was mine. The place offered me something I had not had in years, a space where I could breathe, be myself, and not be constantly on call for everyone else's needs. I arranged for Margaret to help me with the final preparations for the move. She was my constant support during this entire process, offering guidance, a listening ear, and her practical help when I needed it most. But there was still the matter of the twins. They had been my joy for so many years, and the thought of losing them, or having them grow up without the close bond we had shared, hurt more than I could put into words. My relationship with Vanessa was strained, but I wasn't willing to give up on my grandchildren. I knew that if I was going to be a part of their lives, I would have to navigate the new boundaries with Vanessa and Brandon carefully. I hadn't seen them since our confrontation, but I called every evening to check in, speaking to Parker and Penelope briefly. Their voices were always warm, but there was an edge to their words that told me things were different now. I could hear Vanessa's subtle presence in the background, hovering just out of earshot. The control was palpable, but I refused to let it dictate my relationship with them. Margaret had warned me that things might get more difficult before they improved, but I didn't expect the emotional toll that came with seeing how little space I had in their world anymore. On the other hand, there was something empowering about it. I had set my boundaries, and I wasn't going to let guilt or manipulation pull me back into the unhealthy cycle I had been in for so many years. As the week progressed, I continued making plans for the cottage. The bank had processed everything quickly, and I was scheduled to close on the property the following Tuesday. The thought of finally having a place of my own, where I could heal physically and emotionally, was exciting. It felt like I was stepping into a new chapter of my life, a chapter that was mine to write. The phone call I received from Carol Reynolds was unexpected. I hadn't spoken to her since my confrontation with Vanessa and Brandon, and I wasn't sure what to expect. Carol had always been polite but distant, a part of the family but not really in the family. But when she called, there was something different in her voice. She wanted to meet. We agreed to meet at a nearby cafe, and when I arrived, I found Carol sitting at a corner table, looking a little out of place in her pristine tailored outfit. Her gaze softened when she saw me, and for the first time, I saw something more than the polished exterior she typically wore. "Ellie," she greeted me, her voice tinged with sincerity. "I know this must be difficult for you, but I wanted to talk. Not just as a mother-in-law, but as someone who's been watching all of this unfold with growing concern." I sat down across from her, unsure of what she was about to say. I didn't trust her completely, but at the same time, I was curious. "You've been more than generous with our family. With Vanessa, with the kids," she began, choosing her words carefully. "But it's become clear to Robert and me that your generosity has been taken for granted. That's not right, Ellie. And it certainly wasn't fair to you." The words were unexpected. I had long suspected that Carol and Robert were somewhat aware of the situation, but hearing her speak so openly about it made me feel a strange sense of validation. I had been questioning myself for so long, wondering if I was the only one who saw how much I had given, how much I had sacrificed. "I know it's not my place," Carol continued, "but I think it's time for you to put yourself first for once. You've been so selfless, and you've reached a point where that's not serving you anymore. I'm sorry if it took me this long to see it." Her words hit me harder than I expected. "Thank you, Carol," I said quietly, not sure if I was more surprised by her apology or the genuine concern in her voice. "I don't know how it got to this point, but I can't keep living like this. I can't keep giving and losing myself in the process." Carol nodded, her eyes softening. "You deserve to have a life of your own, Ellie. A real life, where you don't have to sacrifice everything for everyone else. And as much as I care about my grandchildren, I see now that you need space to heal. You've earned that, and I don't want to see you lose yourself in all of this." It was a strange moment of clarity, perhaps the first real moment of honesty from someone in this family. Carol had always been an enigma to me, but now, in this quiet cafe, I realized that she too had felt the pressure of family expectations. Maybe, in some strange way, she understood what it meant to be caught in a cycle of obligation. "Robert and I talked," she added, her voice lowering slightly. "And we both agree that we want to help. We'll be covering part of the twins' tuition from now on. It's not just about the money, Ellie. It's about the emotional burden you've been carrying alone." The offer was generous, and a small part of me wanted to jump at the chance to accept it, to ease the weight I had been carrying. But another part of me, the part that had fought so hard to take back control of my life, knew that accepting this would only put me back in the same position. I would be financially entangled with them again, and I couldn't afford to go down that path. I appreciate that, Carol, I said after a long pause. But I can't go back to what we had. I need to build my life for me now, without that kind of expectation hanging over me. Her eyes widened slightly, and for the first time, I saw the weight of years of family dynamics settle on her shoulders. I understand, she said softly, almost regretfully. I just wanted you to know that we're here if you ever need help. But I understand if you can't accept it. It was an odd moment of both liberation and sadness. I didn't want their charity. What I wanted was the freedom to stand on my own 2 feet, to rebuild my life without relying on anyone. But I also recognized the gesture for what it was, an acknowledgement of my sacrifice, and a small olive branch for the future. We talked for a while longer, exchanging pleasantries and discussing the twins' upcoming birthday party, before I left the cafe. As I walked to my car, I felt a sense of finality settle over me. Vanessa's family was no longer my responsibility. I had made the hard decision to step away, to create space for myself, and now it felt like the beginning of something new. The next few days were a blur of packing, finalizing paperwork, and preparing for my new life. The cottage, though still in need of some work, was already starting to feel like home. I had spent years maintaining homes for others, Vanessa and Brandon's perfect, immaculate house. But now, for the first time in a long while, I was creating a space that reflected who I was. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't extravagant. But it was mine. And that was enough. The closing on the cottage was quick, smoother than I expected. The previous owner had been eager to settle her affairs, and with the help of Margaret and a few other trusted friends, I managed to navigate the process without any hitches. When I signed the last document and received the keys, I stood there for a moment, holding them in my hand, feeling their weight, both physical and symbolic. I had made it. I was free. The thought of finally having a place that was completely my own filled me with a sense of peace. No more playing second fiddle in my daughter's life. No more sacrifices, no more guilt trips, and no more putting my own needs last. For once, it was about me. I was no longer a piece of furniture or a caretaker. I was Eleanor Wilson, an independent woman with her own future to craft. I spent the next couple of weeks adjusting to my new routine. Margaret had been my rock through this transition, offering both practical and emotional support as I settled into the cottage. The mornings were slow and quiet. I woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside the window and made my coffee, savoring each sip while the sun spilled through the kitchen window. I started stretching, taking my time to care for my body, and making sure I kept up with my heart medication, something I hadn't prioritized in far too long. The change was almost surreal. After years of being at the mercy of others, constantly caring for the house, for the twins, for Vanessa and Brandon's schedules, I was finally taking care of myself. The freedom was intoxicating. But there was still the matter of my strained relationship with Vanessa. The phone calls with the twins had become increasingly brief, monitored by Vanessa, who was now keeping her distance from me. It was as if our relationship had been replaced by a wall of politeness, each interaction carefully calculated to keep the peace without any real connection. I didn't know how long I could keep up this detached dance. I missed them, Parker and Penelope, more than I cared to admit. But I knew I couldn't go back. I had to hold firm to the boundaries I had set. And then, out of the blue, Carol Reynolds called again. I had nearly forgotten about her, but her voice on the other end of the line brought me back to the present. "I think we should talk," she said, a note of urgency in her tone. "Can you meet me tomorrow? I need to discuss something important." I agreed, of course. Despite everything, Carol was still family, and I was curious about what she had to say. We agreed to meet at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. When I arrived, Carol was already seated, her back straight and her demeanor polished as usual. But there was something in her eyes, something raw that I hadn't seen before. She motioned for me to sit down, and I did, noting the slight tremor in her hands as she folded the napkin in her lap. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation the other day," she began, her voice lower than usual. "About what's been happening with the twins and with Vanessa. And I've realized something." I raised my eyebrows. This wasn't the Carol I knew. The woman who had always been more interested in status and appearances was suddenly speaking with a level of vulnerability that caught me off guard. "Robert and I both owe you an apology," she said, looking directly into my eyes. "For not stepping in sooner. For not seeing the way your generosity was being taken advantage of. We were blind, Ellie. But it's clear to me now that you've been carrying a heavy burden all these years." Her words struck a chord with me. I hadn't expected to hear an apology, especially not from Carol, who had always been so wrapped up in her own world. But her sincerity was undeniable, and it made the years of frustration and hurt feel a little less heavy. "I can't undo the past," she continued, her eyes softening. "But I want to make things right. Robert and I have decided to cover half of the twins' tuition going forward. We'll make sure they're taken care of, without you having to sacrifice your own well-being." The offer was a generous one, and part of me was tempted to accept it. But I didn't want to fall back into that old pattern. I didn't want to be financially tied to Vanessa and Brandon again. I had worked so hard to build my independence. Accepting their help would feel like taking a step backward. "I appreciate it, Carol," I said after a long pause. "But I can't go back to what we had. I need to build a life where I'm not constantly worrying about everyone else's needs. I need to be free of that weight." Carol nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line as if she were processing what I had said. "I understand," she replied softly. "But I want you to know that if you ever need anything, anything at all, we're here. And more importantly, we support you." It was a bittersweet moment. I was grateful for her support, but I knew that I couldn't rely on her or anyone else to build my future. It had to be me. We talked for a while longer, and by the time I left the cafe, I felt a strange sense of closure. Carol and Robert had acknowledged my sacrifices, and while I couldn't accept their offer, their words were enough to help me let go of the anger and bitterness that had been eating away at me. I had made my peace with them. The next few days were spent working on the cottage. I painted the living room a soft shade of sage, a color I'd always loved but never had the chance to use in the past. Margaret helped me pick out furniture, simple but comfortable pieces that suited the space and my needs. The small studio at the back of the cottage was transformed into an art space, a place where I could finally pursue the creative passions I had neglected for so long. Despite the progress I was making, I couldn't shake the feeling of being disconnected from the twins. It wasn't just the lack of physical proximity, it was the emotional distance that seemed to grow with each passing day. I missed them, desperately, and yet I didn't know how to bridge the gap between us without overstepping the boundaries I had worked so hard to establish. Then, a few days after Carol's visit, I received a call from Vanessa. My heart skipped a beat when I saw her name on the screen. I hadn't heard from her in weeks. "Mom," she said, her voice a little tight but steady, "I need to talk to you about something." I braced myself for what was to come. Would she accuse me of abandoning her? Of making things harder than they needed to be? But to my surprise, she continued, her voice softening. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About boundaries. And about how I've been treating you. I know I've been difficult. I'm sorry." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. This was unexpected, but it was exactly what I needed to hear. "I'm not asking for everything to go back to the way it was," she continued. "But I think we can start over. Slowly. I want to find a way to have a healthier relationship. For all of us." It was a small step, but it was a step nonetheless. A glimmer of hope that, despite everything, there might be a way forward, a way to rebuild what had been broken. "I'd like that," I said, my voice steady. "And I'll be here, whenever you're ready." As we hung up, I felt something shift inside me. The fear of losing my relationship with the twins, with my daughter, had always loomed over me. But now, for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of possibility. Maybe this new life, this life where I set boundaries and put myself first, would eventually lead to healing. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope for all of us. I walked back into my cottage, looking around at the space I had made my own. The paintings on the walls, the soft light streaming through the windows, and the sense of peace that surrounded me, it all felt right. This was my life now. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And that, in the end, was all I needed. The weeks passed in a blur of activity, both exciting and overwhelming. The cottage, which had initially felt so bare and intimidating, slowly began to feel like home. Each morning, I woke to the sun filtering through the oak trees outside, the light dancing on the walls of my living room. I savored the quiet, a luxury I hadn't known in years. The simple act of pouring coffee in the morning and sitting in my reading chair by the window, looking out over the garden, became a ritual I cherished deeply. It was like my life had started anew. There were no more meals prepared for others. No more last-minute errands or requests to pick up the twins from school. No more chasing after Vanessa and Brandon's approval. It was just me. Eleanor Wilson. The simplicity of it all, of choosing only what mattered to me, felt like a new world. And yet, no matter how much I tried to embrace the solitude, my mind kept returning to my family. The calls with the twins continued, but they were brief. I could hear the distance in their voices, the subtle tension that always hung in the air when Vanessa or Brandon was near. They were still just children, but they had become acutely aware of the dynamic that had shifted between me and their parents. Even as I kept the calls light and tried to offer them the same warmth I always had, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being monitored from the other side of the line. One afternoon, just as I was getting ready to paint the final touches on a landscape I'd been working on for weeks, I received a call from Carol. My heart quickened at the sound of her voice. Carol and I had spoken a few times since her last visit, but this time, there was a sense of urgency in her tone. "Ellie, I think we need to meet again. Something's come up." The words immediately sparked a nervous flutter in my stomach. What could it be now? Had things escalated with Vanessa and Brandon? I agreed to meet her at the same cafe, the place where I had first felt the weight of the reality that had unfolded around me. When I arrived, Carol was waiting for me, but this time, her face was creased with worry, something entirely foreign to her usual polished composure. "What's happened, Carol?" I asked, my heart racing. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she sipped her coffee, her fingers gripping the cup as if she were trying to steady herself. Finally, she looked up, and I could see the strain in her eyes. "It's about the twins," she said, her voice low. "I didn't want to bring it up, but things are more complicated than we realized." My stomach churned. I hadn't expected anything more than the usual strain between Vanessa and me. I hadn't been prepared for what she was about to say. "Vanessa." Carol hesitated, glancing around as though ensuring no one could overhear. "She's been having some financial difficulties. Brandon, too. They've been pretending to be okay, but it's all been a facade. I'm not sure if it's the stress or something else, but it's affecting the kids." I felt a wave of nausea. My first thought was of the twins. Were they okay? Were they feeling the pressure too? Are they okay? I asked, almost breathless with concern. Carol nodded, but her expression remained serious. "Parker and Penelope are fine for now, but I think they're starting to pick up on the tension. There's been talk of cutting back on some of their activities and making them feel guilty for not understanding the situation. And it's affecting their relationship with you. Vanessa's been telling them stories about how you abandoned them because you didn't want to help anymore. It's not true, Ellie, and I need you to know that." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. This wasn't just about money or tuition anymore. This was about their version of me, their perception of my love for them, being twisted into something ugly. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I had to fight the tears that threatened to spill over. "I thought the space would help," Carol continued. "But it's not just the distance, Ellie. It's the stories. Vanessa's been telling the twins that you don't care about them. And it's breaking my heart to see them caught in the middle." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my emotions in check. So what do we do? How do we fix this? Carol looked pained. I wish I had a simple answer for you. I think the best thing for now is to keep showing up. Don't give up on them, Ellie. No matter what they say, they love you. And they need you in their lives. I nodded, the familiar ache settling in my chest. I had spent so many years giving and giving, hoping for some return, some recognition. But I had never expected it to come to this, where the very people I had loved so much were twisting my role in their lives. After the conversation with Carol, I returned to the cottage with a heavy heart. I had always prided myself on being a source of stability for the twins, but now I felt like I was being pushed out of their world. Vanessa's words were poisonous, and I feared they were sinking into the children's minds. But I wasn't ready to give up on them, not yet. I wasn't going to let their parents dictate my relationship with the twins. They deserved better than this, and I was going to do whatever I could to make sure they understood that. The next morning, after much deliberation, I called Parker and Penelope again. As usual, Vanessa hovered in the background, but this time, I didn't let it faze me. I kept my voice steady, making sure to focus only on them. Hey, sweethearts, how's school going? The usual chatter about schoolwork and their friends filled the line, but as I listened, I could hear the cracks in their voices. They were searching for something in my words, a sign that everything was okay again. A sign that I was okay. I smiled, despite the lump in my throat. I've been working on a new painting. I think you both would love it. Maybe when you come visit, I can show you. We could even do some painting together. What do you think? Parker responded first, his voice eager. That would be so cool, Grandma. Can we paint dragons? I want to paint a dragon fighting a knight. Of course, we'll paint dragons, I said, laughing softly. And I'll help you both with whatever you want to make. Penelope joined in, her voice soft but certain. I want to paint a unicorn. The innocence in their words warmed my heart. For a moment, it was as if nothing had changed. But deep down, I knew the real challenge wasn't painting dragons and unicorns. It was mending the broken trust, rebuilding the emotional bridge between us. And for that, I knew I needed to keep pushing forward. As I hung up, I felt a sense of peace. I couldn't control what Vanessa said to them. I couldn't undo the damage she had done. But I could continue showing up, loving them, and offering them an alternative to the stories they were being told. That was the best I could do. Later that day, I sat by my window, looking out at the garden I had slowly started to tend. The weeds were gone, and the first flowers of spring had begun to bloom. The whole place seemed to be coming back to life, just like I was. It wasn't going to be an easy road, but I was finally on the right path. And, somehow, I knew that, just like the garden, my relationship with the twins would bloom again too. It would take time, but it would happen. On my terms, in my own time, and with my own heart as the compass. The road ahead might not always be smooth, but it was mine to walk. Spring settled deeper into Lake Merrill, and the world around me began to reflect the changes within me. The cottage, with its modest charm, was slowly becoming more than just a house. It was becoming my sanctuary. Every corner, every small project, felt like a reclamation of who I was before the years of compromise and sacrifice. The garden flourished under my tender care, and my art, which had been dormant for too long, was starting to fill the blank canvas of my life once again. Despite the physical distance between Vanessa and me, the emotional pull toward my grandchildren remained. Every phone call, every brief visit, I clung to the hope that things might improve. I hadn't spoken to Brandon much since our tense encounter a few weeks ago. He was always too busy, too wrapped up in his work, to spare a moment for a real conversation. It was easier for him to bury the issues than face them head-on. But then came the invitation, unexpected, yet a hopeful sign from Carol. The twins' birthday party was just around the corner, and for the first time in a long while, I was invited. Not just as an afterthought or a distant figure in the background, but genuinely included. I couldn't ignore the weight of that small gesture. Maybe, just maybe, This was the start of a turning point. The day of the party arrived. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple yet comfortable outfit for the occasion. A quiet excitement buzzed inside me as I packed the gifts I had made for Parker and Penelope. The sketchbook for Parker, adorned with the soccer ball and eagle motif, and a small bracelet for Penelope, made from stones I had personally chosen. These gifts were an expression of my love for them, a love that felt unwavering even in the face of everything that had happened. When I arrived at Robert and Carol's house, the tension in the air was palpable, though no one said anything overtly about the cracks in our family. Vanessa was busy talking to some guests when I arrived, her demeanor still stiff and reserved. She acknowledged me with a nod, but there was a subtle tension in her eyes, a weariness in her posture. It was clear that the rift wasn't just between me and the twins, it was running deep in every corner of our family. But as I moved through the party, I kept my focus where it needed to be, on the twins. When Parker saw me, his face lit up. He ran toward me, his excitement contagious. "Grandma Ellie, you came!" he exclaimed, wrapping his arms around my waist. Penelope, too, greeted me with enthusiasm, her arms outstretched for a hug. As I embraced her, I could feel her small frame trembling with the excitement of having me there. I was careful not to make it about anything other than the joy of being together, of being present in their lives once more. I didn't want to create any more discomfort, but the warmth in their eyes was a welcome reminder of what truly mattered. We spent the next couple of hours enjoying the party, swimming, eating cake, and chatting with the other guests. For a brief moment, it felt like things were almost normal again. I even caught Parker looking at the sketchbook I had made for him, his eyes wide with appreciation. "This is the best present ever, Grandma," he said, flipping through the pages with wide-eyed wonder. "I'm going to draw all the places you told me about." It was a small, simple exchange, but it carried so much weight. For the first time in a while, I felt like I was truly seen by him, that our bond wasn't completely fractured. I didn't need grand gestures. I didn't need lavish gifts. What mattered was the connection, the shared moments of understanding and love. As the party wound down, I prepared to leave. I didn't want to overstay my welcome, and I wasn't sure if Vanessa would want to engage in conversation afterward. But as I turned to say goodbye, Parker dashed up to me, holding the sketchbook close to his chest. "Grandma, will you come visit my soccer game next week?" he asked, his voice full of hope. "And can we go get ice cream after?" His words hit me harder than I expected. He wanted me there. He needed me there. And Vanessa, despite her icy distance, had agreed to bring the twins to my cottage next weekend, allowing them to stay overnight. It was a small concession, but it meant everything to me. For the first time, it felt like there was a real opening, a possibility of healing. I hugged Parker tightly, feeling a surge of emotion. I wouldn't miss it for the world, I promised him, holding his gaze. Vanessa, standing off to the side, watched this exchange with a neutral expression, though her arms were crossed tightly. I could sense her reluctance, her discomfort, but for the first time, I didn't let it shake me. I had to believe in my love for my grandchildren, in the truth of my intentions, no matter how much Vanessa tried to manipulate the narrative. Before I left, Carol pulled me aside. There was something in her expression, an understanding, a quiet solidarity, that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in a long time. "I'm glad you came," she said softly, her voice low enough so no one else could hear. "I know things are hard, Ellie, but you're doing the right thing. You've been so strong through all of this." I nodded, grateful for her support. "I'm just trying to hold on to what matters," I said quietly. "The twins, my health, and my peace." Carol's eyes softened, and she placed a hand on my shoulder. "You're not alone in this, Ellie. You've got us." The road ahead still felt uncertain. Vanessa and Brandon hadn't fully let go of their need for control, and it was clear that their perception of me was still warped by their own guilt and pride. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. I had made my peace with the fact that I could only control my own actions, my own choices. I couldn't force anyone to see the truth, to acknowledge the harm they had done. But I could continue showing up. I could continue loving the children who were still in my life. And I could continue to rebuild my life, piece by piece, with honesty and integrity. As I drove home, the evening sun casting long shadows over the road, I felt a flicker of hope. Things were changing. Slowly, surely, they were changing. The truth was, I didn't need to be in the center of the storm anymore. I had found my peace. And that was enough. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly starting over. Not as a grandmother caught in the webs of manipulation, but as a woman reclaiming her life. The love I had for my grandchildren hadn't been erased, and neither had the possibility for a new kind of relationship with them, one built on respect and authenticity, not guilt or obligation. I could only hope that, in time, Vanessa would come to understand that, too. And with that hope, I began to plan my next steps, not just for the next visit with the twins, but for the rest of my life. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was no longer afraid to walk it alone.